Mishandling of classified documents and his role in attempting to overturn the results of the 2020 election, Mr. Smith respectfully requests the opportunity to testify in open hearings before the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. Jack Smith's team added just one caveat, quote, he's prepared to answer questions about the special counsel's investigation and prosecution, but he requires assurance from the Department of Justice that he will not be punished for doing so. Jack Smith is making this offer to testify in full view publicly because and after Republicans have alleged for weeks now that Jack Smith's team unlawfully tapped the phone records of members of...
The most damning evidence against Donald Trump just became public. And folks, what special counsel Jack Smith revealed in his final reports is more horrifying than anyone imagined. We're not talking about speculation or political mudslinging here. We're talking about hundreds of pages of evidence, recordings, witness testimony, and documents that prove beyond any doubt that Trump committed serious federal crimes while president and after leaving office. The January 2025 final DOJ report lays it all out in devastating detail, showing that Trump engaged in a criminal effort to obstruct the collection and counting of votes and participated in a conspiracy against rights after the 2020 election. This isn't opinion. This is the conclusion of a thorough federal investigation backed by overwhelming evidence. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Jack Smith, for his part, has been increasingly public about what he is watching happen to the Justice Department in which he served and to the rule of law more broadly in this country under Donald Trump. Here's what he said back in September about the pardons of those who stormed the U.S. Capitol. It's video first obtained by The Bulwark.
Trying to stop the democratic process, trying to stop the lawful transfer of power, vandalizing our Capitol, intimidating lawmakers, and assaulting police officers. This is among 1,500 pardons that were granted in January of this year. They were pardoned by the president because they committed their crimes in his name and in his interest.
They committed their crimes in his name and in his interest. Special counsel Jack Smith speaking out about the rule of law and against Donald Trump is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Mark Harris is here, former senior investigative counsel for the House Select Committee on January 6th, joins us. New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush is here. My friend and colleague, MSNBC senior political analyst and contributing host to Pod Save America, Alex Wagner, is with me at the table for the hour. Her new weekly podcast, Runaway Country, premieres today. So excited about that. We'll save some time to talk about it.
Thank you, my friend.
Glenn Thrush, let me start with you. Jack Smith, you and I think were on the air together when we first heard his voice in a public interview. It was a conversation with my colleague, Andrew Weissman, who was one of the first people to investigate Team Trump and the Mueller probe. What do you make of this? I'll call it a salvo, back to Jim Jordan. I'll testify, but I'm going to do it in public with the lights on and cameras rolling and public witnesses.
What makes this absolutely explosive is that Jack Smith didn't just make accusations, he secured actual felony indictments against Trump. We're talking about 4 counts for election subversion and 37 counts related to classified documents. These aren't minor infractions or technical violations. These are serious federal felonies, many carrying potential prison sentences that could have put Trump behind bars for the rest of his life. The evidence was so strong that grand juries, regular citizens reviewing the facts, agreed there was probable cause to charge a former president with crimes. That's unprecedented in American history, and the evidence that led to those charges is now public for everyone to see. The phrase trembling evidence isn't hyperbole when you understand what Smith uncovered. We're talking about recordings of Trump directing illegal schemes, direct witness statements from his closest advisors, confirming criminal conduct, documented plots to submit fraudulent electors, evidence of pressure campaigns against governors, and proof of attempts to conceal key documents. This evidence is so comprehensive, so detailed, and so damning that Smith described Trump's actions as crime-driven and deliberate, not mistakes, not errors in judgment, deliberate crimes committed with full knowledge of their illegality. Here's what should terrify Trump and shock every American. Even though the federal charges were dropped because of DOJ policy against prosecuting sitting presidents and Supreme Court immunity rulings, Smith made it crystal clear that this wasn't because of weak evidence. In his final filings, he emphasized that the decision to dismiss the case does not hinge on the strength of the evidence, which the government fully supports. Think about what that means. The prosecutor is saying we have Trump dead to rights, we can prove he committed crimes, but procedural rules are preventing prosecution. That's not exoneration. That's getting off on a technicality, while the evidence of guilt remains overwhelming. Smith's reports contain a warning that should chill Trump to his core. He stated that the facts prosecutors uncovered will follow the defendant long beyond this trial. This isn't going away. The evidence is now part of the public record forever. It's available for state prosecutors, for congressional investigations, for civil lawsuits, and potentially for future federal prosecution after Trump leaves office. Smith has essentially created a roadmap for anyone who wants to hold Trump accountable, complete with all the evidence needed to prove his guilt. The trembling evidence isn't trembling because it's weak. It's trembling with the weight of truth that will haunt Trump for the rest of his life. What we're witnessing is unprecedented in American history. Never before has a special counsel laid out such comprehensive evidence of presidential crimes, secured indictments, and then been forced to drop them not because of innocence, but because of legal technicalities and political circumstances. The evidence Smith compiled over years of investigation, including hundreds of interviews, thousands of documents, and testimony from Trump's own inner circle, paints a picture of deliberate, systematic criminality at the highest levels of government. Let's dig into the specific evidence that Jack Smith uncovered, because the details are even more damning than the headlines suggest. The investigation conducted hundreds of interviews with witnesses ranging from White House staff to state election officials to Trump's own lawyers and advisors. These aren't hostile witnesses or political opponents. Many were Trump loyalists who were forced to tell the truth under oath. Their testimony consistently pointed to Trump's direct involvement in criminal schemes, his knowledge that what he was doing was illegal, and his determination to proceed regardless of the law. The election subversion case reveals a coordinated criminal conspiracy that spans multiple states and involves dozens of co-conspirators. Smith's evidence shows Trump didn't just question election results or pursue legal challenges. He orchestrated illegal schemes to overturn the legitimate outcome. The fraudulent electors plot alone involved creating fake electoral certificates in 7 states, organizing groups of Republicans to falsely claim they were legitimate electors, and attempting to submit these fraudulent documents to Congress. This wasn't a spontaneous protest or a good faith legal challenge. This was document fraud on a massive scale, and Smith has the evidence to prove Trump personally directed it. The pressure campaigns against state officials constitute another set of crimes Smith documented in detail. The evidence includes recordings of Trump calling Georgia officials demanding they find votes that didn't exist, documented threats against Michigan legislators if they didn't overturn their state's results, and evidence of attempts to coerce officials in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and other states. These weren't requests or suggestions. They were criminal attempts to interfere with the lawful administration of elections. Smith's report details how Trump knew these actions were illegal, was warned by his own lawyers about criminal exposure, and proceeded anyway. The classified documents case presents equally shocking evidence of criminality. Smith secured 37 felony counts related to Trump's illegal retention of classified materials, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to hide documents from federal investigators. The evidence shows Trump didn't accidentally take a few documents. He deliberately removed hundreds of classified files, stored them in unsecured locations at Mar-a-Lago, showed them to unauthorized people, and then engaged in an elaborate scheme to hide them from the FBI and the National Archives. We're talking about documents containing nuclear secrets, military plans, and intelligence sources that Trump treated like his personal property. What makes the documents case particularly damning is the evidence of obstruction. Smith documented how Trump directed employees to move boxes of classified materials to hide them from investigators, how he had his lawyers make false statements to the FBI about returning all documents, and how he suggested destroying evidence. This isn't just mishandling classified information. This is deliberate obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and potentially espionage-related crimes. The evidence includes surveillance footage, text messages, recorded conversations, and testimony from multiple witnesses who were ordered by Trump to participate in the cover-up. The witness testimony Smith gathered is particularly devastating because it comes from Trump's own people. His White House counsel testified about telling Trump his schemes were illegal. His campaign lawyers testified about warning him that the fraud claims were baseless. His own staff testified about Trump acknowledging he lost the election while publicly claiming it was stolen. This isn't hearsay or speculation. This is direct testimony from people who were in the room when crimes were planned and executed. They describe a president who knew exactly what he was doing, knew it was illegal, and did it anyway. The documentary evidence is equally overwhelming. Smith's team recovered emails showing the conspiracy unfolding in real time, text messages coordinating illegal activities, and written notes from meetings where crimes were planned. They have financial records showing money being used to fund illegal schemes, travel records placing conspirators at key locations, and phone records documenting coordination between Trump and other participants in the conspiracy. This isn't circumstantial evidence. This is a documented paper trail of criminal activity that leads directly to Donald Trump. Smith's characterization of Trump's actions as crime-driven and deliberate is supported by evidence of premeditation and planning. This wasn't a spontaneous reaction to unexpected election loss. The evidence shows Trump began planning to claim fraud before the election even happened. He set up the narrative months in advance, organized the infrastructure for the fake elector scheme before any votes were counted, and had plans in place to pressure state officials regardless of actual election results. This level of premeditation elevates these crimes from impulsive bad decisions to calculated criminal conspiracy. The scope of the conspiracy Smith uncovered is staggering. We're not talking about Trump acting alone or with a small group of advisors. The evidence reveals a massive criminal enterprise involving dozens of co-conspirators across multiple states, coordinated through Trump's campaign, his White House staff, and outside lawyers. Smith documented how this conspiracy operated like organized crime, with Trump at the top directing operations, middle managers coordinating activities, and foot soldiers carrying out illegal acts. The RICO-style structure of this conspiracy makes it one of the most serious criminal enterprises ever uncovered at the highest levels of American government. The implications of Smith's findings extend far beyond just the dropped federal charges. What we have now is a permanent public record of presidential crimes, documented with overwhelming evidence that cannot be disputed or explained away. Even though Trump won't face federal prosecution while he's president, this evidence doesn't disappear. It becomes part of history, part of the legal record, and most importantly, available for use in other proceedings. State prosecutors can use it, Congress can investigate based on it, and civil lawsuits can cite it. The trembling evidence Smith compiled will follow Trump for the rest of his life, exactly as the special counsel warned. The fact that Smith emphasized the strength of the evidence while dismissing the cases is crucial to understand. He's making it absolutely clear that Trump is not innocent. He's getting off on technicalities. The DOJ policy against prosecuting sitting presidents isn't a judgment on guilt or innocence. It's a procedural rule. The Supreme Court's immunity ruling doesn't say Trump didn't commit crimes. It says certain prosecutions can't proceed. This distinction is vital because it means the evidence of Trump's guilt remains valid and damning, even if he temporarily escapes prosecution. The political implications of this evidence being public are staggering. Every American can now read for themselves the proof that Trump committed serious federal crimes. This isn't filtered through media interpretation or political spin. It's the actual evidence, the actual testimony, the actual documents that prove criminality. How does Trump govern with legitimacy when there's public evidence he's a criminal? How do Republicans defend someone when federal prosecutors have laid out proof of multiple felonies? How do Americans trust a president who has been caught red-handed committing crimes against democracy itself? The international ramifications are equally serious. The world now has access to evidence that an American president committed crimes to try to stay in power illegally. Our allies and enemies alike can read Smith's reports detailing how Trump attempted to subvert democracy, stole classified documents, and obstructed justice. This undermines American credibility on the world stage in ways that may take generations to repair. How can America promote democracy abroad when our own president is documented as having tried to overthrow it at home? State-level prosecutions remain a very real threat to Trump, and Smith's evidence provides them with a roadmap. States like Georgia, Michigan, and Arizona have their own investigations into Trump's election crimes, and they can use everything Smith uncovered, the witness testimony, the documents, the recordings. It's all available for state prosecutors who aren't bound by DOJ policies about prosecuting sitting presidents. Trump may have escaped federal charges for now, but state charges could still proceed. and Smith has handed state prosecutors everything they need on a silver platter. Congressional action is another avenue where Smith's evidence could prove decisive. The House could use this evidence to pursue impeachment, even though Trump is president again. The detailed proof of high crimes and misdemeanors is all there in Smith's reports. While political realities might make impeachment unlikely, the evidence exists for history to judge and for future Congresses to act upon. Every member of Congress now has access to proof that Trump committed crimes, and they'll have to decide whether to act on that knowledge or ignore it. Civil lawsuits represent yet another way Smith's evidence will haunt Trump. People harmed by Trump's crimes, from election workers who faced threats to businesses damaged by January 6th, can use Smith's evidence in civil cases. The burden of proof is lower in civil court, and Smith has already done the investigative work. Trump could face hundreds of millions or billions in civil liability based on the evidence Smith compiled. Even if he avoids criminal prosecution, financial ruin from civil cases remains a real possibility. The precedent this sets for future presidents is deeply troubling. If Trump can commit these crimes and avoid prosecution simply by winning an election, what's to stop future presidents from doing the same or worse? Smith's evidence shows that our system failed to hold a criminal president accountable, and that failure invites future criminality. The trembling evidence of Trump's crimes becomes a warning about the fragility of American democracy and the urgent need for reforms to ensure no president is above the law. For Trump personally, living with this evidence hanging over him changes everything about his presidency. Every decision he makes, every policy he pursues, every action he takes will be viewed through the lens of him being a documented criminal who escaped justice on technicalities. His legitimacy is forever tainted by Smith's findings. He'll spend his presidency knowing that the evidence of his crimes is public, that prosecutors are waiting for him to leave office, and that history will judge him as a criminal president. The role of the Supreme Court in enabling Trump's escape from justice cannot be ignored. Their immunity ruling, which helped Trump avoid prosecution, will be forever linked to Smith's evidence of actual crimes. Future legal scholars will study how the court's decision allowed a documented criminal to avoid accountability. The contrast between the overwhelming evidence of guilt and the technical legal protections that prevented prosecution will be a stain on the court's reputation for generations. Looking at the broader picture, Smith's investigation represents both a triumph and a tragedy for American justice. It's a triumph because it proved that no one, not even a president, can completely escape investigation and documentation of their crimes. The evidence was gathered, the truth was revealed, and the public record was established. But it's a tragedy because despite overwhelming evidence of serious crimes, the perpetrator avoided prosecution through political and legal maneuvering. The system worked to uncover the truth but failed to deliver justice. The media's role in disseminating Smith's findings becomes crucial for public understanding. Every American needs to know what's in these reports, needs to understand the evidence of Trump's crimes, needs to grasp the severity of what he did. This isn't about partisan politics. It's about documented criminal behavior by a president. The evidence Smith compiled transcends political affiliation and speaks to fundamental questions about democracy, justice, and the rule of law. As we process the magnitude of Smith's revelations, we must confront uncomfortable truths about American democracy. We have a system that can document presidential crimes in exhaustive detail, but can't prosecute them if the criminal wins another election. We have evidence that would convict any normal citizen, but can't touch someone with presidential immunity. We have a special counsel who did everything right, gathered overwhelming evidence, secured indictments, but still couldn't deliver justice because of systemic failures and political realities. The lasting impact of Smith's evidence will be felt for decades. History books will record that Trump committed crimes, that the evidence was overwhelming, and that he escaped prosecution on technicalities. Future presidents will know that Smith documented what happens when presidential power is abused. Lawyers will study Smith's investigation as a masterclass in building a case against a powerful defendant. And Americans will have to reckon with the fact that we had proof of presidential crimes but couldn't or wouldn't act on it. This is far from over. Smith's warning that these facts will follow Trump long beyond this trial isn't just rhetoric, it's a promise that the evidence won't disappear. It will remain available for future prosecution, for historical judgment, for civil accountability. Trump may have avoided immediate consequences, but the trembling evidence of his crimes ensures that accountability in some form remains possible. The question isn't whether Trump committed crimes. Smith's evidence proves he did. The question is whether America will ever find the courage to hold him accountable for them.
Let me start by saying sort of where I am. I am tired, and I assume you are as well, because the stuff just keeps coming over the transom. And as a result, I feel like there's a lot of stuff going on that I'm not calling attention to, and it's not from lack of interest. That is, I have had now for 4 solid days a piece not queued up, but that I've been working on the outlines there and so on, about the United States and its foreign policy and how that applies to what happened with Mohammed bin Salman yesterday, and with the administration's attacks on boats coming out of Venezuela, and even what that may or may not have to do with Russian attack on a Polish railway system last weekend. And every time you sit down, like, this was my day. This was my day to finally get that into print, and then I opened the news, and here we are. So I will do the best I can, but I'm starting to think maybe I should even do these more frequently, just because there's just too much. Anyway, for today, there's a lot going on, and I'm going to start where all of you asked me to start, and that's with President Donald Trump's threats against 6 members of Congress, I think it is, I don't do math terribly well, for a video that they posted on Tuesday. And that video let me just read you what was in it. It was a video by Senators Alyssa Slotkin, who's a Democrat of Minnesota, Senator Mark Kelly, a Democrat of Arizona, Chris D'Aluzzo, a Democrat of Pennsylvania, Maggie Goodlander, a Democrat of New Hampshire, Chrissy Houlihan, a Democrat of Pennsylvania, and Jason Crow, who is a Democrat from Colorado. Now, they are all former military. There is, or intelligence. Slotkin is a former CIA officer. Kelly was a captain in the U.S. Navy. D'Aluzzo was also in the Navy. Goodlander was an intelligence officer. Houlihan served in the Air Force, and Crow was a former paratrooper and an Army Ranger. And they did a video that came out Tuesday, and I wrote down what was in it so you could hear it for yourselves. They said, they speak in turns in the video, and they said in the video, "We want to speak directly to members of the military and the intelligence community who take risks each day to keep Americans safe. We know you are under enormous stress and pressure right now. Americans trust their military, but that trust is at risk. This administration is pitting our uniformed military and intelligence community professionals against American citizens. Like us, you all swore an oath to protect and defend this Constitution. Right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad, but from right here at home. Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders. You must refuse illegal orders. No one has to carry out orders that violate the law or our Constitution. We know this is hard and that it's a difficult time to be a public servant. But whether you're serving in the CIA, the Army, our Navy, the Air Force, your vigilance is critical. Know that we have your back, because now more than ever, the American people need you. We need you to stand up for our laws, our Constitution, and who we are as Americans." And then they end with a very famous American line, "Don't give up the ship." And that, if you don't know the reference there, it comes from a naval battle during the War of 1812. And in 1813, the captain of this ship, this American ship, takes a broadside from the ship is the USS Chesapeake. It's one of the originals, by the way, and in the Navy, and it takes a broadside from a British ship, and it's a really bad broadside. And among other things, the captain of the ship is mortally wounded, and the last thing he says is, "Don't give up the ship." And in fact, the ship does end up getting overtaken by the British sailors and Marines, and that "don't give up the ship" becomes sort of Americans never give up, and it becomes a rallying cry for the rest of the Navy during the War of 1812, and then went on into history as being, "We're never going to give up. Don't give up the ship." And you've heard that again and again through American military history. For example, in World War II, somebody asks for an American resignation or an American surrender, and the answer is simply nuts. That's Americans don't quit, and that's sort of what they were trying to convey there. Maybe more than you wanted to know about Don't Give Up the Ship, but I love naval history, and nobody ever talks about it. Anyway, in my next life, I'll get to do more naval history. Anyway, so they put up this video, and Trump was busy with MBS yesterday, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and I don't think he saw it, because when I read Truth Social this morning, which is the social media platform that Trump is part of, the real nasty stuff really starts after he appears to see maybe one of two things. The Washington Examiner, which is a right-wing coded newspaper, referred to the video yesterday, and so did Fox News Channel when Jason Crow from Colorado was on it, and he was being interviewed by a Fox News host, and really actually kind of owned the room. And after that, Trump posted and then reposted a number of attacks on those people who made the video, saying that they were traitors, that they had committed sedition, and that then he kind of upped it and retweeted reposted, whatever it's called there, retruthed on it. Somebody who said that they should be tried and executed, and he really leaned into that. That, of course, has caused just an absolute furor, as it should. So what you have here is a president of the United States calling for the execution of those he considers his enemies. And there is a bit of a parallel to that in American history that I may or may not tell you more about now. I will write about it this weekend if nothing else huge happens. But of course, one does not want the president calling for the deaths of lawmakers. This is really, really completely unacceptable. And what's happened over the course of the day has been really interesting, because the Democrats who've been attacked have made a joint statement, and then they have made individual statements saying, "Don't give up the ship. We're gonna become the face here of resistance to this regime." But also a number of Democratic leaders who were not either in the military or part of this video have said, now is the jig is up. It's time to pick a side. You can't really play this down the middle any longer, you Republicans who are trying to make this go away. And I have been out straight all day. That is very busy all day. So I have not thoroughly read the news. But to my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I have not seen a Republican taking a stand against this. And that's really interesting. And I'd be really surprised if no one does. Certainly, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt tried to say, he didn't really mean it. It doesn't matter what he's up to right now. That was simply unacceptable. And should it get him impeached? Sure, it should. But is it going to? I don't know. Probably not. But let me walk you through that for a little bit, because there's a lot of things I think that are really interesting going on today. And perhaps yesterday, and really for the last several days, this Epstein, losing on the Epstein issue has tied President Donald Trump into absolute knots. And you have to always keep in mind that he is not mentally okay. I mean, somebody has commented that his lack of inhibition in the calling for the execution of Congress people is indicative of a stage of dementia. And I'm not a doctor. I don't remember what it is, but you can tell that he has lost any sense of inhibitions. He's just saying whatever he wants to say. But I think there's more things going on than that. It feels, like I say, things feel very different to me, really, since Jimmy Kimmel, really, but certainly taking off over the loss of the ability to hide the Epstein files, at least as far as we know right now. And what I mean by that is that the reason that the vote for the bill requiring the Department of Justice to release the Epstein files within 30 days of the passage of the bill. The reason that that was a big deal is because it showed that Trump had lost control of the Republican Party. And that's not to mean entirely, he's not completely out, but they have moved in lockstep with him since really 2018. When by 2019, as we know, in his first impeachment, even all the Republican senators, according to Ted Cruz, believed he was guilty, but they voted to acquit him because they cared about keeping his voters behind him and they wanted to win the 2020 election. And then similarly, after his second impeachment, after the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, Mitch McConnell said, the Democrats will take care of him for us. We don't have to go out on this limb. And so they acquitted him. Not all of them did at that point, but he did not. Not all voted to acquit him, but he was acquitted of both of those things. And they've really stayed behind him because they've wanted his voters, and that has enabled him to be sort of the Teflon president, that they just got behind him and repeated whatever he said, and they kind of tried to create their own reality. But when Republicans turned against him over the Epstein files, it demonstrated that they were no longer his to command, at least on that specific issue. But as I've said before, he's in real trouble on a lot of issues. He is badly underwater in terms of his popularity, in terms of how people think he's doing his job, in terms of how they think he's handling the economy, in terms of how they think he's handling deportations. He's had military officers and federal agents in U.S. cities, which nobody likes, and he is increasingly isolated and increasingly seemingly unable to figure out ways to get his base back, to the point that when he did an interview with Laura Ingraham on the Fox News channel within the last couple of weeks, he found himself defending himself and saying, I'm MAGA. I'm the one who invented MAGA. I'm the one who knows what it is. And he really looks as if he is losing his control of the party. So if you think about his lashing out the way he did, both at the Congress people today, but also at the Reporter, I think you can see somebody who is very, very concerned about his power slipping away. And he knows that it's happening. And now I'm going to do a little detour into the quiet piggy comment, because that's important. And because it ties into this other thing, I think, as well. So what happened on that was they were on Air Force One, and a report, and there was a press gaggle. Now, he's an interesting character because he always talks about how terrible the press is, how much he hates the press. He calls them the fake news or whatever. But he is desperately press hungry. He's always talking to the press. That's why it was such a big deal when he went missing over Labor Day, is because that man talks to the press whenever he possibly can. And he was doing what's called a press gaggle. They were on Air Force One, and you can see it, by the way, it's online, and they were asking him questions. And this woman, this female journalist, asked him about the Epstein files. And what was really interesting about that, it's worth going back and taking a look at it, is there he flashes into fury and goes, quiet, piggy. And that was a really interesting moment if you watch it, because people who, like him, that we call narcissists, really tend to have three channels: rage, charm, and self-pity. And I have always read that he goes through all of those things. We certainly have seen the self-pity, which is there all the time. But, if you've read former Vice President Kamala Harris's autobiography, The 107 Days, which is a better book, by the way, than the reviews suggested, she says that he calls her at one point, and he is so charming that she's like, oh my God, I'm falling into it. I get it. He is so charming when he wants to be. So there's the charm. But the rage we have read about and not seen. And in that flash, you can see the rage. And remember, he's a big man. He's an imposing man. And so I thought that was really interesting. I also thought it was interesting that he went for the term piggy, which is, it's an old-fashioned insult. And many people are talking about the fact he applies those sorts of insults to women, which is true, but it was a very old-fashioned insult. Think about it. I mean, when was the last time you heard someone called piggy? Like that was sort of almost a World War II kind of insult, which, the only person I ever heard it really do it, not, and certainly never in anger or anything, or is that my father used to use that word. And he was born in 1915. So I thought that was a really interesting word that he used. And you wonder if it was something he heard as a child, because his father might have used it as mine did. I think they were somewhat contemporaneous. So I thought that was a really interesting flash of a lack of self-control and fury, and perhaps sort of reaching for the meanest thing he could think of, because that's what he'd heard as a little kid. I don't know if that's true or not, and that's just me imagining, so maybe not. But I thought that was really interesting, and it suggested that he had lost control, that he did not know how to handle the Epstein files, and this was his way of going about trying to reassert control in a certain way. But I think you saw this as well, that sort of franticness in today's messages, which were, we can't let this stand, and even a reference to the idea that George Washington would have hanged these men, and which is just anything he says historically, just discount it. That's my friend Joanne Freeman had a great comment about the historical nature of it, and she said, and plus George Washington wasn't out of his mind, which I think is probably accurate there. But it is a crisis. This is a crisis in that we've got a president calling for the death of elected officials. And they're trying to walk it back, but you really can't walk it back. And there are many things that will come out of this. But before I get into those things, I want to talk about a little bit more about what might be going on here. And that's that I'm not going to belabor Trump any longer. He is, as you know, his mental acuity is not good. His numbers are in the toilet, all that stuff I have said before. So let's set him off to the side. But remember, he is really what managed to hold together that group of MAGA believers, true believers, who want to dominate women, people of color, want to be, have a hierarchical society in which they are at the top of it. And that's not necessarily, some of those people actually have money, but it's not necessarily a reflection on people who actually are dominant. Sometimes it's people who want to be dominant. And this is why you have the sorts of people you saw at the Unite the Right rally, or that you saw at many of Trump's campaign rallies. So Trump could marry those people to the establishment wing of the modern Republican Party, which, by the way, the entire Republican Party is so far to the right of where the Republican Party has ever been, that you can't really, people say conservative Republicans, and boy, did that ship sail. That ship sailed in the 1990s. In today's thinking about the government, Dwight Eisenhower, who was one of the most successful Republican presidents of the post-war years, would have been considered so far to the left he couldn't get elected as a Democrat, right? So the Republicans are way over there. And actually, if you look at what political scientists study, you will see that the Democratic Party has basically not moved at all, that it has stayed pretty much a center to a slightly center-left party. It looked like it took a little bit of a left turn in the 70s, but that's because the Dixiecrats, those segregationist Democrats, moved into the Republican Party, and they're the ones who've gone so far right there over the cliff. Anyway, Trump married the MAGAs to those establishment Republicans like Mitch McConnell, who simply wanted to get rid of popular voting and wanted to concentrate power in a very small people and really put business in charge of the country. But what has happened in the second Trump administration is that Trump has the guardrails are gone, and he doesn't care about those establishment people any longer. That is, he wanted some of their money to get into power, but what he really did is he married himself to the tech bros, who who are not part of that established Republican base. They, in fact, like Trump, want to destroy the existing system because they want to replace it with a different kind of ideology, in the same way that the MAGAs want to replace it with a different kind of dominant ideology. They both want domination, but they want it for very different reasons. The tech bros want it for themselves largely, although some of them are very religious. The MAGAs tend to want it for religion. But that it makes for a really, really uneasy coalition. And what's happened in the second Trump administration is that coalition has torn itself apart. So in the Republican Party, you have, among other things, you have coming to the light now, you have the Senate Republicans and the Senate Democrats at each other's throats. And you can see that in, for example, the fact that the House Speaker Mike Johnson, and Trump clearly thought they could get the Epstein files through the bill through the House because they could get it bottled up in the Senate. And the Senate took one look at that. The Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, is a Republican from South Dakota, looked at that, and he permitted Chuck Schumer to call, and probably asked him to call for a measure that would mean that as soon as the bill got to the Senate, it passed automatically. So Republicans would not have to go on the record for or against it. And if you saw those videos of House Speaker Mike Johnson being questioned about it after the fact, he was incredibly flustered and he was incredibly upset. And he was like, it needed amendments. It needed amendments. He was hoping they would bottle it up with amendments and the thing would get talked to death and it would never appear. And Thune was like, no, let's pass it. And that, of course, put Trump in the bind of having to sign it and so on. But you can see, and then the House, in turn, is pitching a conniption fit over the Senate's insertion of the measure into the continuing resolution to fund the budget of allowing the senators whose phone logs were looked at, completely legally, by the way, because of their connection to the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol, to sue for that. And the House is like, and again, there's another great thing. The Senate puts it in, but they didn't include the House. So all the House members were like, what's going on here? And then they're fighting back against the Senate. So you've got a split between the MAGAs who run the House and the more established Republicans in the Senate. And that's not to say there aren't some of each in both, but they're starting to come apart. And you can see that, I think, most dramatically in the fact, and it got almost no press, and it was really important, that last Friday, I think, I've been on the road, I've completely lost track of time. You can Google when it was. A Democrat, Jared Golden, a Democrat from Maine, and I'm forgetting the name of the Republican from Pennsylvania, and I should have it in the top of my head, and I don't. Together, they had put forward a measure in the summer. They'd put forward a measure together to protect the unionization of federal workers. And the House Speaker Mike Johnson refused to bring it to the floor. So they wrote a discharge petition I think it was in August, and it was 2 votes shy of getting signed, which is, doesn't count. 2 votes short is nothing. And after the Epstein vote, 2 Republicans from, I think they were both from Virginia, New York, joined on. So that's 2 discharge petitions that will force, including the Epstein one, this is another one, that will force the House Speaker to pull forward a measure that is really quite popular, the idea of union protections for federal workers. So you can start to see the Democrats and the Republicans start. No one's singing Kumbaya yet, but you can see places where they are coming together. And one of the things that Trump was probably doing, at least subconsciously, when he put forward those comments today, was to try and make sure that the Republicans no longer felt safe working with the Democrats, that this is his way to blow up any kind of potential coalition. So that is one of the things that's going on. But now there's something else that's going on in that Republican coalition. And for those of you who don't know who I am, which is no problem, I do study the Republican Party. I study political parties in general, but I know the Republican Party incredibly well because I wrote a major book on it. So when I say this is going on in the Republican Party, I'm not just guessing. So the other thing that's going on is the Republican Party under Donald Trump. Remember, he staffed all the places with his own people, and he has forced into office. And the Senate went along with this. The Republicans in the Senate went along with this, which surprised me, with his own loyalists. But the problem with that is Trump's loyalists have a Nazi problem. And that Nazi problem runs through a lot of the MAGA coalition. And for all that the established Republicans wanted those votes, they don't want to be associated with the Nazis. And that is partly principled, I think, having not talked to any of them, but watching them, but also, of course, because they don't want to alienate their Jewish donors. So they're looking at the Nazi stuff that's going on and tearing their hair out. And this is where you can see this in the big fight over the fact that Tucker Carlson, a right-wing podcaster, interviewed Nick Fuentes, who is the leader of the Groypers, and the Groypers are openly, Fuentes has spoken admiringly of Hitler. He is openly racist and sexist, and he thinks that the people, the more established Republicans, are not going far enough, and that many of the people, even in Trump's administration, are not going far enough. And so Tucker Carlson interviewed him and gave him a major platform. And that came right after the Young Republicans had that big thing about their private chat where they were talking about admiring Hitler. And there was a Republican who had a staffer who had a swastika over an American flag in his room. And now today, the Coast Guard has announced that, I think it's Coast Guard. Yeah, the Coast Guard has announced that nooses and swastikas will no longer be considered hate speech, which is just, come on, what are we doing here? So you can see this especially out of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. And just FYI, it is still the Defense Department. They want to call it the Department.
For homicide detectives, their chance of solving a murder is cut in half if they don't get a lead within the first 48 hours.